So you quote Finnegan's Wake. Mad props for that James Joyce book. I took a class on James Joyce in college. I think I read parts of Finnegan Wake. I might have been on drugs or some kind, or I somehow got an A in that class, which probably refers to some kind of curve where nobody understood anything. The only thing I understood and really enjoyed is his short stories, The Dead. And then Ulysses, I kind of, I think, read a few cliff notes that kind of got to the point. And then Finnegan's Wake was just a hopeless pursuit. For people who haven't looked at it, maybe you can elucidate to me better, but I felt like I was reading things, words, and the words made sense, like standing next to each other. But when you kind of read for a while, you realize you didn't actually understand anything that was said.
Right. But did you have a feeling, though? That's one thing I found interesting about Finnegan's Wake. I never fully understood it, but the words caused feelings in me, which I found fascinating. And sometimes I couldn't predict it from the semantic, black and white context of what I was seeing in front of me on the page. But the rhythm or the melody would make me feel certain ways. And that was what I always was intrigued by with Joyce. Of course, that was his... He existed on a spectrum too, and he wrote, as you say, more accessible works. I learned a lot about Irish history from, Portrait of the Artist as a Young Man, and there was just he could be as objective as he wanted to be, but then when he let himself loose, he was in this realm where the words had their own purpose, separate from semantic meaning, from their dry dictionary definition.
There's a funny story that was told. Doesn't matter if it's true or not, but they said that James Joyce, when he was young, when he was in his teen years, would go around sort of Ireland drinking and so on and telling everybody that he's going to be one of, if not the greatest writers of the 20th century. And he turned out to be that. Mm. So that I always think about that little story that somebody told me, because I have a lot of people come up to me, including myself. I'm a bit of a dreamer. You get into certain moods where you say, I'm going to be the greatest anything ever. You get like people tell you this, especially young people. And it kind of, it makes me feel all kinds of ways. But that story reminds me that like you just might be one of the greatest writers of the 21st century, for example, if somebody were to tell me that. And like, don't immediately disregard that, because one of the people that say that's almost like a precondition. That's like a requirement, just to believe in yourself. Maybe it's not a full requirement, but it's an interesting story.
Well, I think when someone tells you that, then it creates one sees an opportunity, and then it would be a tragedy if the opportunity weren't captured, right? And so then that creates some impetus, some motivation to do something good.
I think the mind, it's like I guess that's what like books like or books or whatever. I don't even know if it's a book. The Secret plugs into. They kind of make a whole industry out of it, but there is something about the mind believing something, making it a reality. It is just time and time again with Steve Jobs, like your belief in yourself, your belief in an idea, sort of embracing the me versus the world, embracing the madness of this idea and making it a life pursuit, somehow morphs reality around you. For some tiny fraction of the population. For everybody else, you descend into all the beautiful ways that failure materializes in our lifetime.
Well, you mentioned love earlier. I mean, that's a great example of how belief in something makes it real, right? It's not reasonable on the face of it, but because you believe it's reasonable, then it actually does become reasonable, and then it is real. And so that's a good example. That doesn't happen. I'm also in a bioengineering department. We don't imagine that a bridge is soundly built, and then it is soundly built. That's something that it doesn't come up in too many realms of human existence, but love is one of them, and the ability to have a fixed idea and to say it's true, and then it is true.
A bridge is a kind of manifestation of love, so maybe it does work a little bit, but it can break down like Chernobyl did. You can't just say it's safe. You have to also prove it's safe. But on Finnegan's Wake, I think, maybe correct me if I'm wrong, you're using kind of Finnegan's Wake to give one perspective on what madness is, of what's going on in the mind. How much of that is that we're simply unable to communicate with the person on the other side of their mind. Like there's almost like a little person inside the brain, and they have some circuitry that's used to communicate emotion, communicate ideas to the outside world. And there's something about that circuitry that makes it difficult to communicate with the little person on the other side.
So if you look at what shows up in schizophrenia, with many cases, the what we call thought disorders, what we call the individual speech symptoms of schizophrenia, Finnegan's Wake is loaded with them, and it's just full of them. We talk about Clang associations in schizophrenia, where the word that is said is echoes in some way the previous word, and we call that a Clang association because there's no other reason than the similarity of the sound, like a clang of a garage door being hit, and it has and sometimes it's not even a word, and we call that a neologism, a new word being created, and of course Finnegan's Wake is full of that. And then we also, in schizophrenia, there's what we call loose associations or tangential thought processes, of course full of that, where things just go off in directions that are not linear or logical. And you can't read Finnegan's Wake, I think, without, certainly as a psychiatrist, you can't read it without thinking about schizophrenia. And then when we look at the families of people with schizophrenia, and Joyce was no exception, there very often are people within the family who are on the spectrum. Some have it. Some are able to see it from a distance, from a safe distance. There's an association between schizophrenia and what we call schizotypal personality disorder, where people are not quite in this severe state of schizophrenia, but have some magical thinking, have some unusual thought patterns. Very often, those are family members of people with schizophrenia. So this points to this, again, to this idea that there is a range, even along this very severe, very genetic biological illness, that human beings dwell on different spots along that spectrum.
I should mention that we have my friend Sergey pulling up stuff, young Sergey or old Sergey, I don't know what to call you, but there's drafts of Finnegan's Wake. Yeah, I actually saw pictures of this from, I think it was on Instagram or something. These are early drafts of Finnegan's Wake. And it's so beautiful to see. For people who are just listening, there's just random paragraphs and writing all over the page with stuff crossed out. And it's great to see that Joyce himself was thinking in this kind of way as you're putting it together. How much do you think he was thinking about schizophrenia, the schizophrenic mind?
I think a lot. I think, it's known that his daughter suffered from schizophrenia, and this is what's depicted here on the page is something that I'm sure he either felt himself in some level, was able to access this nonlinearity of processing, or had seen enough in family that he knew what it was and was able to reflect it down in black and white on the paper. So it was, what he was able to do was quite authentic in that sense. Of course, I don't want to pigeonhole him. He was doing much more than that. It was much more than talking about altered human thought processes and thought disorders. But that was an aspect that he was so good at representing that it had to be intentional to some extent.